the biggest strategic problem that for India from this new Mecca Pact? Well, it's really the coming together of two major adversaries of India. India cannot take this lightly. One side is Pakistan, undoubtedly backed with by China, and the other side is Turkey. A new kind of arrangement can emerge between Israel, Japan, UAE, and India. All four countries naturally have an alignment in terms of technology, in terms of financing, in terms of economics, in terms of infrastructure and logistics, and in terms of security. And all of these countries could come together in some senses to create a de facto quad. I think that's already happening on the ground. Look at the natural combination. India brings scale, heft, technology, and of course certainly the size of its economy. Japan brings high technology, also financial and economic heft. Israel brings cutting edge technology, great security understanding, great security apparatus, and UAE again brings great economic heft, and it brings infrastructural understanding of supply chains around the world as far as business and finance and economics is concerned. These countries are a natural set of countries that can come together to take on, in some senses, the misadventure of this Muslim NATO. I'm of the firm belief that even though there hasn't been any big announcement, so to speak, about this kind of cooperation is already happening between these four countries.
Earlier this month, Turkey, Pakistan and Saudi came together for a major defense pact. Some called it the Islamic NATO, others called it just a regional pact to sort of hedge against Iran. So how should India read this pact, given that two of its biggest adversaries today, Pakistan and Turkey, are part of this bloc? What should India be doing? Hindol Sengupta joins us to decode what's up, how it impacts India and what India should be doing. Hindol, welcome.
Thank you.
What has actually changed on the ground, Hindol, after this? Because this pact earlier this month has been described by as a potential Islamic NATO. Is that overselling the pact or a justified comparison?
Thanks, Aditi. Two or three things are important. Pakistan has been trying to get this sort of a pact for a long time. Here is a country that is deeply starved of finance, economic support. Its economy is crumbling. It has deep dissatisfaction in many parts of its own territory, in Balochistan, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, and many other areas. It has always tried to position itself as a sort of security provider, the keeper, as it were, of the Muslim nuclear bomb. And it has always, if you listen to many things that Pakistani analysts, security people have said over the years, there's always been this thing about Pakistan being the security provider as that Muslim country which has a nuclear weapon, and it can, spread the security umbrella to other Muslim countries, to fellow Muslim countries, so to speak. Now, this has never come true because, of course, the world is far more complicated than that. Countries don't only think of themselves in terms of a religion. They have other geopolitical, ambitions and strategies. They have, geoeconomic strategies. They think of themselves in many ways. Of course, Pakistan somehow tends to think of itself only in one dimensional manner, so to speak. So it has never come true. But now Pakistan sees, in some senses, a ray of light at the end of a long dark tunnel, because it finally feels that as the Trumpian policies of America have pushed West Asia to a corner, so to speak, now comes its moment of trying to, be able to get some sort of leverage by positioning itself as a net security provider. This would have never happened, of course, Aditi, as you know, had it not been for the devastating war between America, Israel, and Iran.
Right. So Saudi, of course, buys itself some security given the unreliability of Trump's America at this point. Turkey gets into the Middle East in a much bigger way than it was, and Pakistan, of course, gets money for using its army all over the world except in its own backyard. But having said that, they have very different threat perceptions. What exactly is binding these three countries together? And then I'm going to come to what's in it for India.
At the moment, what binds these three countries together, Aditi, is a very simple thing. Both Pakistan and Turkey see themselves as countries which need to flex greater geopolitical muscle. Please remember, Turkey also has been wanting to spread its wings and flex geopolitical muscle, and Erdogan's Turkey also tries to use this entire Muslim angle to its own benefit. For Saudi Arabia, of course, it's a different story. The Saudis have really tried to build a sort of network across the region and around the world to try and build themselves as the country of the future, moving away from perhaps one day in the distant future when fossil fuels will no longer be their core economic heft, but develop new ideas, essentially try to do what the UAE has done, try to build a sort of Saudi Arabian Dubai, so to speak, a Saudi Arabian Abu Dhabi, attracting finance, attracting capital, attracting enterprise from around the world. That is Mohammed bin Salman's great vision. He's been trying to do that by building new kind of cities, new kind of architecture, new kinds of ways of governance, opening up the country, giving more freedoms than before. But all of this in some senses has got derailed. Please remember, Saudi Arabia was also very close to signing up for the Abraham Accords to find some sort of resolution even with Israel. Now all of this has been completely derailed by all the violence that we have seen, all the war. First, of course, the attack on Israel, and then the war in Gaza, and now, of course, the war in Iran. Today, Saudi Arabia looks at its own environment very differently. Its relationship, even with the UAE, has soured to a degree because they have conflicting interests in various parts of the world, including in North Africa. But also, Saudi Arabia realizes, as many countries in West Asia realize, that the American security umbrella that they always counted on is perhaps not as strong as they once believed it to be. So this is the big question mark. The great exchange, as it were, the deal of the last maybe 100 years, the fundamental deal around the world was that West Asian energy would be exchanged at a stable price in exchange of American security. This was the deal that founded, in some senses, the modern West Asia. Energy, stable price energy in exchange of security. That deal, in some senses, lies in shambles. There are deep question marks about that deal. America is trying its best to, in some senses, underline once again that it is, of course, a very, very formidable power. And indeed it is. You would have read recent reports about how America is really trying to ensure that the movement of cargo in the Hormuz Strait does not end or does not stop, as the Iranians are trying to stop. But because American bases across West Asia could be attacked by Iran in the Iran war, which actually nobody would have believed until it happened. Because it actually happened, because Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, all of these countries came under attack, there is a big question mark about how far the American security umbrella has been strengthened and how capable it is. And therefore Saudi Arabia is trying to find new ways to defend itself, and one of the ways is this pact, this so-called Muslim NATO, this so-called Mecca Pact between Turkey, Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. What does Saudi Arabia bring to the table? Of course, financing, a major attribute, and of course energy as at a stable price, especially for its close partners.
Nobody's talking about China's angle in this entire Muslim NATO, so to speak. On one level, there is this entire conversation about, a Muslim NATO, probably as a counter to the US-led Western world. Also in terms of China, because of China's close relations with Pakistan as well as Turkey. Is that an angle too?
No, the China angle is very important, Aditi. We cannot discount the China angle. Whenever there is such turmoil in the world, remember, in some senses, if America is perceived to be weak, China is indeed getting strengthened. If I were Chinese today and I looked at the world, what would I be seeing? America is so embroiled in West Asia that it's having to pull out its warship out of Indo-Pacific waters and taking it to West Asian waters to support what's going on there. And this is a major win in some senses for China. China wants to ensure that it can push its own narrative in the Taiwan Strait, take control of Taiwan perhaps sometime in the distant future, and the more America gets embroiled in West Asia, the more the Chinese will get strengthened in Asian waters. Already Southeast Asia is looking at all these developments with great worry. You're seeing that in Seoul, for instance, the South Koreans are now saying that they're very worried about the developments that they're seeing, including about the proliferation of nuclear weapons in North Korea, and indeed, of course, at the back of their mind, certainly in China. So these are big questions that we have been confronted with. Japan is remilitarizing in a big way. Will one day Japan want a nuclear weapon too? Perhaps, we don't know, but it's certainly on the path of remilitarization once again. All of these things are because of the fear that has been created, because China is building military strength at a pace unheard of in history. For instance, China is building naval power at a faster pace than any other country ever in history. And all of these things really matter. This is the reason, this is the cause why the more America gets embroiled in West Asia, the more China gets strengthened. And we cannot, in all of this, cannot forget China. Please remember, anything Pakistan does de facto has the blessing of China, and no doubt their participation in this Mecca Pact, in this Muslim NATO, also has in some form or the other a hand or blessing of China.
For India, what is the single biggest strategic concern arising from this Mecca Pact then?
Well, if I got your question correctly, there are 2 or 3 key things to take away from this mega pact, Aditi. One of the things is, especially for India, since we're doing this conversation in India, one of the key things for India is that it really needs to reimagine how it looks at West Asia, how it looks at Pakistan, and indeed, of course, how it looks at China. I have suggested in my essay recently that a new kind of arrangement can emerge between Israel, Japan, UAE, and India. All 4 countries naturally have an alignment in terms of technology, in terms of financing, in terms of economics, in terms of infrastructure and logistics, and in terms of security. And all of these countries could come together in some senses to create a de facto quad. I think that's already happening on the ground. It may not be announced as such, but it's already happening on the ground. A de facto quad to, in some senses, which would balance this new Muslim NATO, so to speak.
What should India be worried about?
Well, what is the biggest, this is a very important question, Aditi. What is the biggest strategic problem that for India from this new Mecca Pact? Well, it's really the coming together of 2 major adversaries of India. India cannot take this lightly, because one side is Pakistan, undoubtedly backed by China, and the other side is Turkey. It in a sense means 2 major adversaries of India have come together with, by the way, having dragged in another country which actually has fairly friendly relations with India, and yet it has been dragged into this conversation, into this pact, and all of this undoubtedly with the blessing of China. So this is the strategic risk that India faces. The other strategic risk that India faces, of course, is that in West Asia, where it has very good ties across the board, things might get destabilized because of this pact. Please remember, the Indian diaspora and India's goodwill is across West Asia. Nearly 40% of the UAE population comes from India. A large part, I think 6 to 8% comes of Saudi Arabia comes from India. Similar numbers in Qatar and other parts of West Asia. India has very good ties across West Asia. Now, this pact, and if the war in Iran continues to, in some senses, go out of hand, in some senses it already has gone out of hand, but if it continues to progress and become worse, then all of this, India's West Asia story gets destabilized. Already, please remember, India had invested hugely in the Chabahar port of Iran, and that too has got, that story has also become far more complicated. The third part of the story, Aditi, the IMEC corridor from Europe to India, the major industrial and business corridor that would be a dream project, that also has become very complicated and very disturbed because of the war in Iran, because of the war in Gaza, and of course the actions of America and Trump, and indeed, of course, hand in hand with Israel. So all of these stories, all these stories, West Asia, the IMEC corridor, and of course two of its major adversaries, backed by a third coming together, one of them with nuclear weapons no less. All of these things are not good news for India, and India should be very careful.
Right. So, do you believe that India is already, in this age of blocks and pacts and, people coming together for their defense interests? Should India, or does India perhaps need a bloc of its own? Have we started working in that direction already?
Yes, indeed, Aditi. As I mentioned to you a couple of answers before, I have suggested that a natural coming together would be India, Japan, Israel, and the UAE. All these countries would, in some senses, form, and I think in a sense this is already happening, a new kind of quad, so to speak. All of these countries are very worried about a few things. They're very worried about growing security challenges around the world, supply chains getting disrupted. They're very worried about the proliferation of nuclear weapons. They're very worried about Pakistan and what kind of disruptive role Pakistan is playing around the world. They're also very worried about America and America's interventionism. They're worried about this entire supply chain getting through the Strait of Hormuz getting deeply disturbed. And very critically, they are very worried about China's role in all of this. So I think these countries can naturally come together. Look at the natural combination. India brings scale, heft, technology, and of course certainly the size of its economy. Japan brings high technology, also financial and economic heft. Israel brings cutting edge technology, great security understanding, great security apparatus, and UAE again brings great economic heft, and it brings the infrastructural understanding of supply chains around the world as far as business and finance and economics is concerned. So they are a natural, these countries are a natural set of countries that can come together to take on, in some senses, the misadventure of this Muslim NATO. And I do believe that some of this cooperation is already happening, and this cooperation is only going to grow in the future. So therefore, I think we should look at very carefully what's happening with Japan, what's happening with India, in collaboration with what's happening in Israel and UAE. All of these countries can have a major impact with one another, developing counters and counter strategies to take on what's going on with China, Pakistan, and of course with Turkey. So therefore, I actually believe that India should invest much more in its relationships with these three countries, which it already is, by the way, doing: Japan, UAE, and Israel.
Definitely something very pertinent about what you've just pointed out, because definitely Japan defense partnership, UAE defense partnership, Israel, very long-term defense partnerships we've been having with them. And all those conversations over the last several months have been revisited, have been renegotiated, and have been doubled down on from India's side and from these respective nations. So it seems that this new quad is already taking shape.
Absolutely. I'm of the firm belief that even though there hasn't been any big announcement, so to speak, about this kind of cooperation is already happening between these four countries. You can see the kind of, look, for instance, Japan's real endeavor to take in more and more Indians at various levels, including at starting levels of its economy, because it has declining demographics, and Indians and Indian engineering talent and financial and economic talent can have a great role in filling positions in Japan. Already UAE and India are really a natural bridge. I think few two country sets in the world are closer today than UAE and India. The same with India and Israel. So I think this exactly what you're saying. You're absolutely right. This is already happening. I am only pointing out that this is taking shape. On the ground, I believe this kind of cooperation targeting and looking to stymie the misadventure of things like the Muslim NATO and especially of Pakistan, the Turkey, and with China's shadow on top of it. All of this is already panning out because all these four countries have great interest in trying to tackle this.
And those interests are converging simultaneously at the same time. Very well said, sir. But what about the old Quad? You've talked about this new Quad, but there are the other sort of alliances that were built. The old Quad, ITU2, all these other alliances. Where do they stand in this new mix of things that are now developing?
Very good question, Aditya. Once again, look, we'll have to wait and watch. I mean, as I pointed out, that we have to finally understand how committed is America to the Indo-Pacific. I pointed out that America is now moving out a key warship out of Indo-Pacific waters towards West Asia, which is where its focus is. We have to see what happens in this war in Iran and when America's interests will come back in the Indo-Pacific. That's the only way China can really be, in some senses, buffered and stopped in its ambitions across the Indo-Pacific. So we will wait to see what happens in that. And that, of course, will also determine the future of the old Quad, as you call it. What is going to happen to the old Quad? Well, we will have to wait and see what happens to American interest in the Indo-Pacific. If America's interest comes back in a big way, then the old Quad will also take new shape and form. I2U2, again, has been deeply disturbed because of these conflicts in the Middle East, in West Asia, in Iran, in Gaza. So we don't know how that is going to pan out. I already mentioned that all of this has put a cloud also on the IMEC corridor, which is very valuable to all the countries participating, Europe to India connectivity. But all of this will only really take shape once the conflict is, in some senses, brought under control. And at the moment, I don't think it's under control.
Okay, so this proposed four-way grouping, of course, we've not given a formal name to it, and I don't think neither of these countries want to give a formal name to it. So it brings together different strengths. There's Israel's technology, India's scale and geography, of course, UAE capital and logistics, Japan's, of course, maritime capabilities. Definitely, could this become the next big strategic network then linking the Mediterranean, the Gulf, the Indian Ocean and the Indo-Pacific, given that you're saying the ITU2 and even the Chabahar port, really, all these other connectivity things seem to be in a limbo because of the Iran war?
Well, I do think that in some senses this is already happening. Please remember, we are moved away from the world of multilaterals to what we call minilaterals and actually even one-on-one engagement between countries, right? And in that spirit, some things don't need major announcements. I think at a bilateral level between India and Israel, between Israel and the UAE, and between India and Japan, each of these sets of countries are already cooperating, I think, with one another. And all of these, multiple coordinations, multiple cooperations overlap into the web of four countries that I'm pointing out. And this is already happening in the ground. What will this architecture, what shape and form will this architecture take in the future? Well, time will tell, but it's certainly true for India that these today are some of India's most valuable geostrategic relationships and partnerships.
Right. And, if I just imagine the geography of all these nations, one particularly interesting area of convergence also could be maritime security, don't you think? There's the Eastern Mediterranean and the Red Sea and the Arabian Sea and, of course, the Indo-Pacific.
Absolutely. I think maritime is really one of the most critical domains. It has always been a critical domain. Please remember, in the past, the great colonial powers, Aditi, were all naval powers, right? Including the UK, including Britain itself. And now maritime is getting more and more interesting and more dynamic simply because of what's going on in the maritime domain. You please think about undersea cables as a new domain where there is so much conflict, right? What is happening with undersea cables, the cutting off of and destroying of undersea cables can meet entire internet shutdown. Most people think internet comes in the air, but they don't realize actually it's this massive network of undersea cables. That's one domain we are seeing a lot of competition. Look at the competition in choke points. China is very worried about the Malacca Strait, has been for a long time. Even more worried today after seeing what has happened in the Hormuz Strait. Look at all the concern that many people, including China, are showing because India has finally decided to take up its long-standing project of developing the Andaman and Nicobar Islands and the Great Nicobar Project, which takes India's power right up to the mouth of the Malacca Strait. So in a forward defense sort of way. So all of these things are happening together in the maritime domain. You can see the expansion of nuclear submarines, for instance, which gives second strike capability. So all of this makes maritime one of the most engaging domain of conflict, especially because the whole of global trade happens essentially on major ships, right? I mean, global trade cannot exist without the maritime domain. So I think this is going to be one of the most critical domains of the future, and we will see much more action there. And indeed, as you're saying, these four countries could have a very important role for one another in the maritime domain.
So, I can't help but talk about India's, stated foreign policy goal of strategic autonomy. Does strategic autonomy, therefore, in 2026 mean staying outside alliances or having enough partnerships that you cannot or India cannot be strategically isolated?
No, it's very simple. I mean, strategic autonomy for us means today what it has always meant in some senses for us. India takes its decisions by itself. To use Minister Jaishankar's words, which side is India choosing? Well, India is choosing its own side. India believes its scale, its heft, its history, its geography gives it a unique position where it does not have to be part of somebody else's camp. It is a camp by itself. It is a pole by itself. I often talk about the G2.5 world, where the G2 world is India, China and America, and the 0.5 at the moment is India, which will soon become 1, but at the moment, in a sense, it is 0.5 because of its scale, heft, its strategic importance, the fact that it's a nuclear power, because of its economic heft, and so on and so forth. So we are really in a G2.5 world, Aditi, where increasingly we are seeing America seems to be accommodating China in a G2 sort of a scenario, accommodating China's advancement and power projection. And the 0.5 in all of this is India. Now, of course, I have always argued in many conversations that the next decade will be the most critical for India, where there will be a lot of pressure to stymie India's rise and India's power. India can't allow that to happen because fundamentally the world of the future is going to be a multipolar world. There's going to be the US and its partners, China, of course, with its own sort of people, its own sort of countries under its own sort of network, and of course India. India, in some senses, another third pole with its own vast relationships across the world, and in some senses a balancing factor of the world, not wanting to be part of either the US camp or the China camp, but a camp on its own, so to speak, if it can consistently increase its economy, increase its economic heft, and build a true military industrial complex.
Awesome. So clearly a new political chessboard is taking shape, and if this is indeed the beginning of that, then this one stretches from the Mediterranean to the Indo-Pacific, and of course India is not sitting there, just sitting there, not as a piece being moved by others, but as a player which is shaping the board. So thank you for those inputs, Hindol, and thank you viewers for watching this. And if this interests you, please stay tuned. We'll be coming up with interesting, discussion points with Hindol and his unique perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much.